one horn higher than the other. You can see that? Okay, higher than the other. Ram with two horns higher than the other. All right, so it looks like Babylon is not even mentioned in this chapter. Is there anything that might explain that?
No.
Why is Babylon bypassed here? What happened to Babylon?
Because
Pretty much heading out. Just a few years till 539 BC. In fact, Daniel was already in Persia when he had his vision. You know what I mean? That would be the next kingdom coming, Persia. So Babylon, no longer mentioned in prophecy.
So if he was in Persia, I mean, Babylon is gone.
As it was on its way out to end in a matter of few years. 539 BC. Okay, are you with me? The ram. What was this ram doing in verse 3? Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before me the river a ram which had two horns, and the horns were one, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Let's talk about the two horns. One horn higher than the other. Is there any correlation with that to the bear in Daniel 7, whose one leg was longer than the other? See? One leg longer than the other. Yeah. The same characteristic, like one kingdom would dominate the other. This is an alliance, the Medes and the Persians. In the end, the Medes would be overthrown or assimilated into the Persian kingdom, and it would just be one kingdom. Right? That's why it's like this. Now, I saw the ram, verse 4, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So, what is it described as? Described as being great. Theater of operation. Where was it? Where did Daniel see this ram operating? By the river, on the ground, right? On the ground, by the river. Let's go to the next symbol. After Medo-Persia came Greece. What is Greece represented here as? Verse 5. And as I was considering, behold, as a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So, Greece, the next kingdom, as confirmed by history, a he-goat. A he-goat. What's noticeable about this he-goat? A he-goat with a notable horn between the eyes. Who did that represent?
what's his name?
Alexander the Great, right? Yeah. Alexander the Great emperor of Greece. What else was it doing? Theater of operation. What was it doing? Aside from it came against the ram. Yeah. Touch not the ground. Touch not the ground. Interesting, isn't it? The ram was on the ground. This power is airborne. It's airborne.
Is it speed? Is that what it's?
Speed, yes, speed. Also dominance. It is superior to the other kingdom before it. Right? And verse 5 says, verse 6, and he came to the ram which had two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was moved with rage against him, and smote the ram and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable horns towards the four winds of heaven. What else is said about this? Became very great. The ram was great, but this one is even greater. It's very great, right? And nothing could stand against it. When the horn, what happened when the notable horn between the eyes was broken? Four notable horns come up when the notable horn between the eyes broke, right? So is there any correlation between the four horns that came up when the notable horn of Alexander was broken and the four wings and the four heads of the leopard in Daniel 7?
Yes.
It's the same
Same thing.
thing, right? How wonderful
Yeah.
that God can. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and every piece fits nicely together. Nicely together. So again, you have Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, the four generals, being represented by the four horns that came up when Alexander died. Alexander had no heir, apparently, and these four leading generals took over his empire. Wonderful. It touched not the ground. It became very great. It was definitely greater than the previous kingdom before it, the ram. Next we have Rome, described in verse 8. Verse 9, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south, toward the east, toward the pleasant land. What is this? What is this now? Rome is described under one symbol, little horn.
Why does it say the little horn?
A little horn.
Chapter 7, it talks about that little horn which was
Right, right. Yeah. Because in the end, Rome would be absorbed by this power, right? Rome would be assimilated by this power. But little horn here, represent Rome, both in its pagan and papal state. We will find out soon. Okay. And how is it described? Exceeding great. So this is the superlative of great now. The ram was great. The Greeks were very great. And then Rome would be exceeding great. Can you see the progression of power here?
Yes.
Yes? Exceeding great.
So many $1 trillion given, that it says
Right.
probably 50
exceeding great. And it would wax exceeding great towards the south, Egypt, towards the east, Palestine and Babylon, and towards, Babylon and Persia, and then the pleasant land representing Canaan, Judea. In verse 10, it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. You can see how violent and oppressive this kingdom is, right? So if the ram was on the ground by the river going back and forth, and the he-goat was airborne, it didn't touch the ground, where do we find this power working now? What's the area of operation? Higher, where the stars are located. Can you see that? Do you see the exceeding great? It reached to the stars. Now, it's not talking about literal stars, of course. You know, this power didn't ride spaceships and go up to the planetary heavens. What do the stars and the host of heaven here represent?
Isn't it speaking of God's people?
God's people, verse 24, which is the explanation of this passage. Verse 24 says, "And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and it shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people." So the stars in heaven are represent God's holy people. Why are God's holy people represented as being in heaven as stars?
That's where their citizenship is.
It's a gospel principle. God's people are of this earth, but they don't belong to this earth, right? In Ephesians chapter 2, God's people are described as being seated with God where? In heavenly places. In Revelation 14, verse 6, they are angels flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach. God's people are heavenly. That's why they're described here as hosts. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 5, the persecution of the saints during the Dark Ages is described in the following words. Revelation 13, verse 6, 5 and 6. The papal power did this, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given him to continue for how long? 42 prophetic months. This is the same as the 1,260 prophetic days. You know what I mean? Yeah. In verse 6, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. Did the papacy fight against those that were living in heaven? No. No. It's talking about God's people. They are described as being what? Dwellers of heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven. Our names are written in the book of life, in the sanctuary in heaven. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Daniel chapter 8, verse, what this power, both pagan and papal Rome would do this, by the way.
How come it says that it was not of his own power?
Not of his own power, because everything is through God's control. If God does not allow it, it does not happen.
Okay, that's right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Go back to Daniel chapter 1. How was Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, able to overthrow Judah? Verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands. So Nebuchadnezzar did not conquer Jerusalem in his own power. God gave it to him.
I just thought maybe there was something else.
Yeah. So God, it's not in his own power. Same thing is said about in verse 24. Read verse 24. And his power shall be mighty, but not in his own power. Are you following along? Yeah, because everything depends on God's permission. These kingdoms don't have power over anything, right? Jesus told Pilate, "You have no power against me, except unless it is what? Given from above." Pilate was threatening Jesus. "Don't you know I have the power to release you or to crucify you?" Jesus told Pilate, "You have no power over me except it is what? Given from above." Right? I hope you see that now. Chapter 8. We are now in the little horn symbol, okay, representing both pagan and people in Rome here at this point in time. Okay, where are we? So it waxed, verse 10, it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. You know what that means already, right? That is Rome, both pagan and papal, destroying God's people. Israel, and then later on the church, spiritual Israel. Now when we go to verse 11, this is where the change takes place from pagan to papal. From pagan to what? Papal. The change or the shift from pagan to papal Rome happens here. How is it described? Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the Hebrew says, and from him the deity was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary cast down. This is the taking down of pagan Rome. The daily here is paganism or pagan Rome. And you're wondering why. Pagan Rome. He magnified himself even to the Prince of Hosts. Who is the Prince of Hosts here? Christ. Who is he? Pagan Rome.
When Christ was crucified.
And he magnified himself even to the Prince of Hosts. Jesus was crucified under the Roman power, right? And from him the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Let's analyze this. Okay, like I said, this is the time when paganism is taken down, and in its place, verse 12 now, the papacy is set up, papal Rome. So we need to study these two verses very carefully. But from him the daily was taken away. The word sacrifice is added. It's not in the original text. And taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Let's talk about that daily first. You know what that means in the Hebrew? By the way, Daniel 8 is now in the Hebrew language, whereas Daniel 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2 is in Aramaic. But when we go to Daniel 8, it's back to the Hebrew, and there's a reason for that. Okay. Verse 11, pagan Rome, taken down. Verse 12, papal Rome, established. Let's find out. Let's see why this is so. The word translated daily here in the Hebrew just means continual. It has nothing to do with what's happening every day. This is a very, very bad translation. It just means continual. So let me meaning of the daily here. In Daniel 8:11, daily. Let's just put some bullet points here. Daily is tamid in the Hebrew. which simply means, can you see this? This is too big? Too small? Simply means continuous. Continual or continuous. Continual or continuous. Uninterrupted, in other words. The word sacrifice is not in the original text. And this is very important. So this has nothing to do with sacrifices. It has everything to do with something that is continual. Now, why is paganism, by the way, this is the original pioneer view, why is pagan Rome or paganism in Rome symbolized by continual? Do you have any idea? Open your Bibles to Daniel 7. And we will read (11 and 12). I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, the little horn of Daniel 7, right? Papal Rome. I beheld even till the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. What beast do you think this is that was destroyed and given to the burning flame?
This is the pagan one.
The fourth beast, the beast that was described right before this. The fourth beast, Rome, right? The fourth beast. I saw how this beast was what? Given to the burning flame, right? At the second coming of Jesus. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. What beasts are these? The rest of the beasts. The ones before it, the lion, which represents Babylon, the bear, which represents Medo-Persia, and the leopard, which refers to Greece, right? Their dominions were taken away. They had no more territory, no more authority, but their lives were allowed to continue. Where?
Revelation 13.
How were the lives of these pagan powers able to continue? Revelation 13. Let's go to Revelation 13. Revelation 13, and we will read verse 1 and 2. Revelation 13, 1 and 2. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 horns, 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. What power is being described here? The beast coming out of the sea? Rome. What kind of Rome?
People.
Rome. Verse 2. And the beast which I saw, I'm in the wrong, was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and the mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. So these kingdoms, which were pagan, were allowed to continue in the fourth beast. One of its horns that rise from it was the one that would replace it, Papal Rome. So paganism continues in Rome. Am I making sense? That's why it's called the continual. Does that make sense?
Rome, pagan Rome.
Pagan Rome. Pagan Rome. Which later on would be assimilated into Papal Rome, which is nothing but baptized paganism. You know what I mean? Papal Rome is in essence still paganism. See that?
So
So-
is that what it means when it says that their lives were prolonged?
Yeah. So paganism continued through Rome. Continued, the practice of paganism continued through Rome, because Rome would assimilate paganism from these other powers into himself. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Beautiful, isn't it?
yeah.
That's why our pioneers were correct. Paganism was represented by the word daily. Daily. Now, but going back to Daniel 8, so from him the daily was taken away. What is paganism? Daily again, I gave it up.
The daily,
Paganism, right?
yeah, pagan.
It was taken away and replaced with something else. The place of his sanctuary, the pagan sanctuary, was replaced with what? Verse 12, and a host was given him against the daily. Again, that sacrifices should not be there. By reason of transgression, it casteth through to the ground, practiced and prospered. Okay, so the place of his sanctuary. What is this sanctuary? We have a strange interpretation of this now in the church. The daily sacrifice is translated or interpreted as the work of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary.
Yeah, I've heard it.
And the sanctuary that was taken away or cast down here is the heavenly sanctuary. No, folks. We're not talking about Christ's ministry here. Although it is true that his heavenly ministry was attacked, right? But this is not what it's talking about here. This word sanctuary, you need to understand some Hebrew here. It's not the heavenly sanctuary. If you look at the Hebrew here is mikdash. So, sanctuary, the sanctuary that was cast down is paganism's sanctuary, not the heavenly sanctuary. How do I know this? The sanctuary, mikdash, in the Hebrew, not to be confused with the heavenly sanctuary. In Daniel 8:14, it says, unto 2,300 days, then shall thou what?
Sanctuary will be cleansed.
The Kodesh be cleansed. The Kodesh be cleansed. So the heavenly sanctuary is always Kodesh, not Mikdash. What is Mikdash? What is Mikdash? Mikdash is a temple on earth, not in heaven. When Mikdash is used in the Old Testament, it's always referring to a temple that is built on earth, whether it is God's temple or pagan temples, but built on earth. To give you an example, Exodus 25, verse 8. What does it say? Let them make me a sanctuary. You know what the word here is? Mikdash. Not Kodesh. Why? It's on earth.
Okay, so it can be for both.
Yeah, it can be idols, it can be pagan or God's temple on earth. But the Kodesh, which is cleansed after 2,300 days, is Kodesh, meaning holy.
That's the heavenly.
Mikdash is a derivative of Kodesh too, but it's different meaning. So Rome had a sanctuary. Pagan Rome had a sanctuary, and it was taken down and replaced with something else. Are you familiar with the Pantheon in Rome? Where emperors would deposit all the idols that were taken from the countries they conquered. They would deposit them there. Right? The casting down of paganism sanctuary is symbolic language for that paganism being replaced by something that is externally Christian, but is still pagan. So, for example, Zeus would be replaced by Saint Peter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Tammuz would be replaced by the baby Jesus. Ishtar would be replaced by Mary. You know what I mean? So it's Christianized paganism.
You said what symbolizes that?
What symbolizes what?
You said a Hebrew word,
For
which means that it was replaced.
so the paganism system of worship was replaced, cast down and replaced by Christianized worship. But it was still pagan. So the pagan symbols were Christianized. So Zeus would now be Saint Peter, for example. And all these other deities had Christian names now. You know what I mean? This is basically still paganism. Why was it done? To attract the pagans to join the church. Are you following along? Yes? In verse 12, and a host was given him now against the daily by reason of transgression. So a host was given him, papal Rome now, supporters, he had support, a host was given him because of apostasy or falling away. And it cast down the truth to the ground. This is a religious power, and practiced and prospered. There was an apostasy in the church, right? The word of God was replaced with tradition. The law of God was changed. Sunday was brought instead of Sunday. Idols were brought in. That's what we call a falling away, here called transgression. A host was given him because of the falling away. Are you following along? If there was no falling away, there would be no host. And this little horn, papal horn, would not exist.
So you say that when it says the host, it's speaking about a military, like a...
No, a support base. So the horde is a support base. Believers in the system. A host was given him. By reason of what? A falling away. Or transgression here. Apostasy, in other words. Are you following along? And then it cast the truth to the ground. So this is clearly a power that is opposed to the truth. A religious power. Right? Whose support base comes from apostatizing from the truth. So why is pagan Rome or paganism under the symbol of Tamid or something continuous? I did not write it down here.
Because they are being continued.
Because paganism continued to live through Rome. Right? I read to you Daniel 7 verses 11 and 12, where the other beasts were continued to live, right? And then Revelation 13 verses 1 and 2. Interesting. So you have the taking down of paganism and the setting up of papal power here in verses 11 and 12. Are you following along? Yes? So papal Rome set up because of apostasy. Or falling away from the truth. Very sad, huh? And then in verse 13, what do we have now? Then I heard one saint speaking And another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. What is going on here?
So this sanctuary, is it speaking about Mikdash?
Kodesh.
Oh, the heavenly
The heavenly sanctuary is Kodesh in the Hebrew. Then shall the Kodesh be cleansed. From the truth. This is Daniel 8, verse 12. So in verse 13, what do we have? A question. How long, right? How long shall the daily and the transgression of desolation, to keep both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? Now, if you interpret the daily here as Christ's heavenly ministration in the sanctuary, you have a big problem. How can the daily, in cooperation with the transgression of desolation, trample the sanctuary underfoot and the host? Right? And the word sanctuary here is also Kodesh.
So what does it mean then, when it's saying that it's trampling underfoot the sanctuary?
Oppression. The sanctuary and the worshippers underfoot. The sanctuary has to do with trampling the work of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary. You know what I mean?
Through the teaching, false teaching.
Through its false teaching, through its introduction, false dogmas, making of no effect the work going on in the heavenly sanctuary,